Atheist Nomads, episode 402. Wrapping up how we got here.
The podcast you're about to listen to includes cursing and talking about hoo-haws. Please be advised.
Welcome to another episode of Atheist Nomads. I am Dustin, and joining me is Lauren.
Hello.
And, okay, so for Dustin Off the Degree, yeah, I know that was a really long title. Probably a little confusing, because I've been trying to work out how to do this, continue doing the series for Dustin Off the Degree on how we got to this quagmire of a situation that ended with the, attacks on the U.S. Capitol and voter suppression efforts and all of that, and trying to work through some of the buildup. And we already covered the Satanic Panic, which was definitely a factor, since you compare that to QAnon. And, well, it's basically you take the Satanic Panic and make it politicized.
Sounds like human nature to me.
Yeah. A humanized or politicized Satanic Panic is QAnon.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all it is. But there is a little bit more there, because there's, how did all of the rabid crazies end up on the right? Because back in the day, they weren't. Heck, not too long ago, several decades ago, the parties weren't necessarily one on the left and one on the right. There were progressive liberal Republicans and conservative Republicans, and there were progressive liberal Democrats and conservative Democrats.
Yeah, Democrats being the progressive left and Republicans being the conservative right. It kind of goes back to what?
60s and 70s.
Yeah.
It's a relatively recent occurrence.
Of course, that's how it's always been for many of us. So
yeah.
It's kind of hard to imagine it being anything else.
So, but when you had that time period where there wasn't that stark, polarized political divide, we had progress on things like building highways and expanding access to running water and electricity and going to space and going to the moon and trying to make some progress at fixing the environment instead of just destroying it. And one of those moves in the 1970s transferred federal lands that were not part of national forests, well, basically consolidated federal lands that weren't national parks or Indian reservations or military bases and reservations, into either being a forest or grassland under the National Forest Service, or everything that didn't get organized under that became part of the BLM. And the BLM was formed.
Okay.
They also started...
Idaho's a lot of that.
Right. We've got a ton of it. It also ended homesteading.
Which, I can't believe homesteading lasted that long.
It was one of those things where, when it was still the frontier, you could get a homestead. And then once the frontier was closed, you could no longer get a homestead. So, that never really happened in the East. It did happen in the West through... homestead offices in Oregon were getting closed down in the 1800s. Idaho probably would have been the early 1900s. Alaska, it continued on until the 1970s.
Wow, did not know that.
Yeah. Arizona probably went on until the 30s or 40s. And so no more homesteads. What is private land is private land. What is public land is public land. Period. For all of eternity is basically the premise of those changes. And trying to rewild certain areas, which meant adding in some restrictions on ranchers grazing their animals on public lands, removing some roads that weren't necessary, trying to restore some habitats back to wilderness levels.
At the history of Idaho, for example, and mining operations that are basically in the middle of bumfuck nowhere now.
Yeah.
People used to have to work out there. Those roads are gone.
Yeah. And so...
I suppose somebody's descendant could be hanging around saying, that's my property.
So then there was, in response to that, of course, people who were upset that these roads and trails are going away and there's area closure, so they can't ride their motorcycles and ATVs. You had hunters that were losing access, afraid they were going to lose access to hunting areas, and ranchers who were losing access to grazing area and ease of travel to those grazing areas because there were dirt roads that were getting removed. And it's kind of crazy to think of dirt roads getting removed, but there are ways to make them no longer there.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of uproar in the Intermountain West. Idaho, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, Montana, Eastern Oregon, Eastern Washington, mostly with people in the lowlands, not in the mountains.
There's a Wyoming in there too.
And yes, Wyoming too. Yes, sorry. But it was really in the Intermountain West with the sagebrush steppe, where people were it was mostly about farmers being unhappy about decreased grazing abilities.
So ranchers.
Ranchers, yes. And then that got coined as the Sagebrush Revolution. At a campaign rally in Salt Lake City in 1980, Ronald Reagan declared that he was part of the Sagebrush Revolution.
Rebellion.
Or Sagebrush Rebellion.
Yeah, right. Ho-hum.
Which started pulling in the ranchers and sportsmen and outdoor recreation enthusiasts of the Intermountain West into the Republican Party.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to separate those two now.
Before that point,
but
most ranchers would have been Democrats. After that, they were all Republican.
Right.
It really changed things. Now, when you look for what was the actual acts of rebellion of the Sagebrush Rebellion, other than like trying to make things inconvenient for federal officers, the biggest ones have been the Bundy family in recent years.
Yeah, because that was not good. Now they will. Yes, I can speak for them making things difficult for federal. My sister did a job one summer where they were counting locusts in eastern Idaho, so she had to go out to. All these farmers agreed to have traps put out on land, and of course there was lots of them where the only access to the public land was through a ranch or farm. And she got guns pulled on her so many times because she was trespassing, even though these guys had already agreed to let a representative go check out these traps. It's like, this is for your own good. These guys are standing at the gate with guns in hand saying, don't you dare come on my property, you big government. And it was just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Her life was in danger all the time for that.
Yeah, and you'll find on public roads.
That was like 5 years ago. 10 years ago now.
And you'll find driving across dirt roads out in the middle of nowhere that there's fences where it's the next 100 miles is all BLM land, but there's a fence blocking the road.
Random fence. You can move it.
Because they can't stop you because that's public land. But they put up a fence there.
Yeah, they make these terrible barbed wire fences. These are a pain in the butt, but you have every right to take it down.
Well, you have every right to open up the fence.
Open the fence, yeah.
Because some of those are part of the lease with the federal government, possibly, and others definitely aren't.
There are websites you can go to check on that kind of thing.
Oh, nice. But the Bundy family, like the big issue that started that standoff in Nevada, almost 10 years ago now, was the fact that Bundy wasn't paying his lease fees for the grazing areas. I kind of wonder if he ever paid the lease fees.
That may have contributed to his bullheadedness.
Yeah.
If he never had, he never paid him, they probably said, you owe back payments. And he's going to be like, I never paid him before. I'm not going to pay him now. But that doesn't mean you pull a gun on him.
And you keep not paying for 20, 30 years. And okay, now you need to pay millions.
Yeah. And
at that point, you get somebody to show up with guns and have a standoff with federal agents.
Yeah.
And that's the Sagebrush Rebellion. It never turned into anything big. It was just enough to become a term that gets thrown around.
It's enough to gain favor with ranchers.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Or in my case, hate ranchers. I mean, no offense to anybody out there whose family are ranchers or anything, but there is a certain, this land is my land. This land is not your land, even though it's public, and your cattle are out there grazing, pooping, stomping down grasses, and destroying an entire ecosystem that belongs to the public for your own profit and benefit. No.
Yeah. And so that ended up creating one of their aims was the elimination of federal land. That has make all land private. They rejected the right of the federal government to own land. And that at the worst, it should be owned by the state. And at best, it should all be private. Now, if you're out in the West, that's insane and also would be terrible. One reason why I would say it's absolutely insane is you look at like central Idaho. What the hell would you do with that land if it was private? It's so rugged, so mountainous, so remote.
It would be dude ranches. It would be privately run dude ranches.
With helicopter access.
With helicopter and plane access. I mean, we've seen airstrips out there.
True.
It's basically just a big old backyard for people to ride their horses in and play ATVs, and it's a playground.
And also, there'd probably be a fair bit of mine all of it.
The
chop
water,
down all of the trees.
The water resources alone would be enough to cause a freaking civil war.
Yeah.
There's not much there, but the stuff that's there is really important.
All right, so there's the Sagebrush Rebellion. It wasn't really much, but it did get ranchers and by proxy farmers more solidly in the switched over to the Republican camp.
And just to clarify, Bundy's family had paid. They had been paying from 1954 to 1993, and that's when Clive decided to stop paying.
Oh, okay.
21 years after that. Well, yeah.
So he paid for a long time and then stopped. Okay. All right. So thank you for that clarification. And then there was several other, around that same time period, there was the Waco compound issue where you had you had an offshoot of the Branch Davidians under the control of David Koresh buying and then congregating into a polygamous compound outside of Waco, Texas, where they amassed firearms until the federal government decided to step in, which resulted in a massacre that left dozens of women and children dead.
Right.
And created a lot of public unhappiness about it.
Yeah.
Then a little bit after that, there was Ruby Ridge, where some militia nut jobs in northern Idaho had the ATF show up to find out what they were doing with all the guns and explosives they had on their compound. And agents fired back at a teenage boy and killed him. He shot at the agents. They shot back.
We saw firsthand at the Malheur Refuge standoff that placing women and children on in the front as shields will work.
Yep. Because of those two incidences, if there are women and children present, federal authorities will not approach. And
they shouldn't have back then either. I mean, given it was a teenager with, probably shouldn't have tried to shoot back. But it is a cowardice way of fighting big government to use and they volunteered, the women and children volunteered to go in the front and say, ha, you can't shoot us now. Why they didn't snipe him, I don't know. Why they didn't SWAT, I'll never understand why they didn't do anything other than there was probably a lot of cash exchange. There was a lot of political handshakes going on. And
after
it was not just federal government trying to avoid another massacre. There was a lot of other stuff going on with that.
Absolutely. Federal government not trying to avoid a massacre, but also federal government trying to avoid setting off what could be an actual Sagebrush Rebellion.
Right.
Because what happened after Waco and Ruby Ridge was Timothy McVeigh and the Oklahoma City bombing.
Right.
And he said the reason he did it was because of Waco and Ruby Ridge, that the government was getting too bold and killing too many people, so he was going to go attack the government and killed over 200 people.
God, that's messed up.
All government employees. It was a...
Yeah, clerks.
Yes. Clerks.
Jesus.
So that all kind of died down. There has long been a weird, crazy right-wing militia movement throughout various parts of the country. All of these kind of came together in the anti-government pro-gun and anti-government and pro-gun kind of merging, and then merging in also with the Republican Party.
Well, I don't know. I don't know, because I'm only, 36? So in my lifetime, it seems to me like the possession of a gun has gone from, I have the right to protect my family, to, I have the right to fight the government.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just propaganda, if that's actually what happened, or if that's misleading. But the few people who think that they have the right to own as many guns as they can in order to protect themselves from federal government overreach, that's definitely just within the past.
Since Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah, 90s?
It's
20, 30 years?
It's basically a narrative created by Rush Limbaugh and the NRA in the 90s.
Yeah. Well, and obviously Bundy.
Bundy's definitely benefited from it, but it had already permeated throughout at least the right by that point.
What's funny is I had back to Bundy just for a second. The reason why they took up arms and decided to fight the federal government was because the federal government told him to stop grazing in certain areas because they were trying to protect a desert tortoise. He was going to fight government overreach over a tortoise.
Yep.
Wow. That's but if you need an excuse, you're going to find an excuse.
Oh, okay. My cousin a number of years ago found out that the gully on the family farm qualified as a wetland. Before anybody in the government could find it, he made sure that he filled in the gully.
That's fucked up. Sorry. As an environmentalist, that is messed up.
Yeah. That's the mindset.
But that is, yeah.
The Bundy mindset would be, oh, there's a tortoise problem. Let's get rid of the tortoise.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's still being fought all over the world. You know, there's who are we here to support? Are we here to support people or are we here to support animals? And that seems like a really dumb question to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to argue both sides when you're arguing from the extremes, though. So,
yeah. Well, and as all this has been happening over the last 30 years, more and more things became politicized. Land policy was one of the first things to become politicized. The environmental movement became politicized.
Which is weird because if you change it from environmentalist to conservationist,
mm-hmm.
you swing back to the right.
Yeah.
Most of Idaho's conservationists are sportsmen
mm-hmm.
who want to protect the wild so that they have something that they can shoot. Which, in order to shoot deer, you have to have good habitat for the deer.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a win for people who want, to protect wildlands, but they can't get along because they belong to different parties. There's very few people who can meet in the middle on that.
Yeah. But you take those groups, you add in the politicizing of guns, and it didn't take long from there for everything else to become a politicized partisan issue.
Because I remember it was definitely around George H.W. Bush, because I remember thoroughly hating anybody who liked Bush for all of those reasons. But so that started more towards the Reagan era?
Yeah.
I mean,
started with,
leave it up to Reagan, right? We can blame everything on Reagan.
It started with Reagan, and by 2010, McConnell made the last couple issues that weren't political and made them partisan.
It keeps them relevant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that got us to the point where adding in the internet and everybody being able to get a platform and algorithms that were getting really good at keeping people's attention, very amorally just trying to keep people's attention. And the world was fully primed for Q. And then Q was able to quickly spread, pull in all of the conspiracy theories all into one, get people who were on the fringes to go along with the ideas, culminating in a insurrection and storming of the U.S. Capitol.
I still can't believe people actually believe that crap. I don't know. Of course, I can't believe people believe in religion either. So I guess I'm a little biased. A lot of people that I've seen who ended up, you see on Reddit, people complaining about family members
mm-hmm.
getting sucked in by Q, and it's almost all religiously based.
Mm-hmm.
The phenomenon of your opinions being sanctioned by God.
Yeah.
It's not new, but it definitely seems to have taken this particular turn.
And Reagan also was the one who started pulling the evangelicals into the conservative movement and giving them more credence so that their movement could grow and at the same time strengthen the conservative movement. And that set up making Q an inherently religious thing, but Q as the modern satanic panic or witch hunt, they have all been inherently religious. Even going back to the blood libel in Rome, that had religious elements to it. Religion wasn't even really a concept at that time, but it was as religious as it could be for that time period.
I do know at least one person who is not religious who got sucked into some of the Q stuff, but that's because they went for the easy target, the children.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't tolerate that. I have no patience for that. But yeah, thank you, 4chan.
All right, so that's how we got to the mess that we're in. It's that we've always been here. It just flared up.
What we need to do is return to the Thanksgiving rules. You don't talk about politics, you don't talk about religion, and you don't talk about war at the dinner table. Stop projecting everything on Facebook so that family members and friends don't know all of your innermost feelings, because deep down we're all hate-filled people.
Yeah.
So just keep it to yourself.
Yeah. And if we
keep sharing pics of those grandkids, and that's just, you're not going to convince your grandmother that, to change her mind.
Yeah. And then our next Dustin Off the Degree series will be on soteriology, the doctrine of salvation.
Oh, I was hoping it was based off of the word satire, not...
No.
Okay.
And
darn. There's a religion I can get behind.
And how incredibly ridiculous the core principle of Christianity really is.
Well, that'll be fun.
All right. We have news. First off, Alabama Democratic Representative Jeremy Gray has been trying since 2019 to get rid of Alabama's ban on yoga in public schools.
Oh my God. I forgot about that. Because
Uh-huh.
what works as a really good practice to keep kids calm in school and to deal with their feelings must be meaning that they're converting to Hinduism.
Yeah.
And, fuck the Hindus? What?
So this all started with the Alabama Board of Education voting in 1993 to prohibit school personnel from, quote, using any techniques that involve the induction of hypnotic states, guided imagery, meditation, or yoga.
Isn't that what most prayer is?
Yes.
So, they kind of shot themselves in the foot with that.
A little bit of anti-New Age.
Definitely.
And also still satanic panic.
Yeah. Oh.
Like anti-New Age fueled by satanic panic in 1993.
Damn hippies.
So that's gone on since then until, 2019, these attempts have started. And the bill's sponsor even said, quote, this whole notion that if you do yoga, you'll become Hindu. I've been doing yoga for 10 years and I go to church and I'm very much a Christian.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe they see those documentaries about young teenage girls running off with a charismatic yoga teacher and think that that's what's happening.
Maybe it's...
whatever it is, it's anti-cult is what they're trying to do. And Hinduism in that aspect is not a cult. And yoga has been shown to be great in a lot of different areas.
Well, first off, yoga, even though it has its origins in Hinduism, doesn't have to be done as a part of Hinduism.
No. In fact, many people choose to do yoga in a completely secularized, health-motivated, exercise-motivated aspect, which is, I think, how most Americans probably do it.
Yep.
The ones who are using it as a spiritual, meditative thing, most of them aren't Hindu.
Right.
They're still mostly probably Christian if you're looking at North America.
And if they were just afraid of a charismatic yogi coming in to convert all of their children into his cult. Yeah, I know there was a lot of fear of cults in the 80s, from the 80s and 70s and 80s, weird period of cults in the US, some of which who were Hindu. It's just weird.
Yep.
It's all weird.
It seems like they missed the boat on that one. Like, you're like 20, 30 years behind on this, but it doesn't help that more and more kids are getting diagnosed with autism, and meditation is a great way for oversensitized people to be able to ground themselves, which means that more and more kids are being told to do such things. And then, of course, unless it involves Jesus, it must be banned.
Yeah.
So weird.
Yeah. And, I remember this would have been freshman or sophomore year of high school at my Adventist Junior Academy. So we're talking around the year 2000. That there were talks and videos about how to keep from getting sucked in by the devil. And the things to avoid were rock music, Dungeons and Dragons, Harry Potter, and yoga.
Yoga definitely seems like the odd man out there. But
it's all bizarre when you really think about it. But it was that by the idea that transcendental meditation was a way to, by emptying your mind, that just opens it up to be filled by the devil. And with
Harry Potter fan fiction, I don't know.
And with Harry Potter, it's that by studying witchcraft, because witchcraft is real, you're actually just welcoming in the devil. And Dungeons and Dragons and rock music, obviously you're just welcoming in the devil. And so you had the three active ways of welcoming in the devil, and then yoga and meditation were the passive ways to just let the devil take hold.
Oh boy.
Push out God, let the devil in.
Or go out and buy a pair of sneakers.
So that, I'm sure, is exactly why the Alabama Board of Education banned yoga. The bill failed to advance out of committee because it ended in a tie vote.
Oh, that sucks. I learned about that in government class.
Yeah.
That was a very disillusionment being crushed kind of moment. It's like, oh wait, most of this, if it's a tie, we don't even get to hear about it?
Because
Dang.
To pass, you need 50% plus one.
Right.
And yep. So it ended in a tie. The bill died.
Try again next year.
It'll come back next year. Some new research has been published in the Academy of Management journal that has found that religion causes the gender, well, not necessarily causes, that religion exaggerates the gender pay gap. And by exaggerates, I mean makes it way, 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 way worse.
Duh. I have yet to hear a secular reason for a woman to not earn the same amount.
One of the things they wrote was, quote, management researchers have called religion a benign and positive force in business. Because of that, we are seeing these policies that let religion in. But when you look at the management literature with a fine-tooth comb, there's been no scrutiny of religion and gender attitudes. And they looked at countries and states and provinces and regions within countries, and they looked at how religious the area was and how bad the gender pay gap was.
It probably follows along with education, too.
More or less. It is a factor, but yeah. But they controlled for education and found it correlated with religion even more than education, even though there is a relationship there as well. But they found places where 95% of more people say that religion is important in their daily lives. So places like Pakistan and the Philippines, women earned around 46% as much as men. In countries where fewer than 20% of people said religion was important in their daily lives, like Sweden and Estonia, women averaged around 75% of men's wages.
That's a pretty big leap.
46 to 75%. That is a huge difference.
Yeah. Yep. And then you look at that averaged out across most of the countries and regions. I bet it probably zeroes in at about 65 or 72%, depending on how extreme.
Oh, across the entire world?
Yeah.
Oh, it would probably be, I'm sure it'd be closer to the
45,
50% mark.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But they found that what religion it was doesn't matter.
Because all religion hates women.
So if most of the believers in a country were Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, or adherents of folk religion, the wage gap was greater and correlated closely with how many people said religion was important in their daily life. They even looked at within the United States and comparing states within the US and found it correlated almost exactly. You could zero in on cities and found that it also correlated almost exactly.
Yeah.
That's pretty nuts.
It's not benign. It's not positive. religion does not belong in a business unless the business is religion-based. And if you're working for a business that is religion-based, you need to be aware of those risks and work to fix it.
And I personally believe that religion has no place in business, period.
There's too much money to be made in it.
Yeah, religion should be focused on religion and stay out of things like business and education and healthcare and stick to churches and synagogues and mosques and the like. That's the kind of world I'd like to see. Because, yeah, the pay gap it directly correlates, and that's bad.
That'll be an interesting one to throw at the next guy I see who claims that the wage gap doesn't exist.
Oh, one other interesting thing they found was that they expect the wage gap to vanish in 28 years in the most secular countries. So like Sweden and Estonia. And that in the most religious states in the United States, Alabama, Mississippi, and the like, it'll take 109 years.
Well, let's be honest. In that case, you might as well just say it'll never happen.
Yeah.
Because as the U.S. continues to slide back into a more religious, well, I don't know.
The minority rule.
Yeah, the minority rule. Who knows?
Yeah. It's all of that is assuming that the U.S. does not become a less democratic country than it is, and that the demographic trends continue as they are. That it'll be, if it takes 109 years, that's basically saying it's never going to happen. And speaking of demographic trends, the most recent poll out of Gallup has found that only 47% of Americans, as of 2020, belong to a house of worship.
Well, that is interesting.
For the first time ever, less than half of people in Gallup's poll said they belong to a house of worship.
So what does that mean for the trends in the U.S.? Does that mean it's actually getting better, and that it's just the extremes that are being louder?
So starting in 1937, the first time when they asked this question, they found that 73% of Americans belong to a church.
Right. Everybody had their neighborhood or town church that they went to.
And all this reporting wasn't based on, are you actually the member of a church, but do you say that you are when asked? By 1975, it was down to 71%. So it only dropped 2 points. In 1999, it had dropped 1 more point, down to 70%. And since then, it has fallen by another 23 points.
Jeez, so nothing, and then a huge drop.
In 22
now, is this,
years.
If somebody asks you, do you, what is your religion? And you say Methodist. Or is it, I belong to the First Methodist down on so-and-so street? Like, is it asking about a specific church property, or is it asking
the question is, are you the member of a church or other house of worship?
Okay. So the more generalized, do you identify as blank blank?
But this one isn't about identity, it's do you claim to be a member of? Which is a little bit different question, because every way you ask those questions is always different. If you ask, do you identify as a Christian?
Well, okay,
that number's still higher.
That doesn't necessarily show that people are like leaving the church. It just shows that they're less likely to identify with a particular named church due to, I don't know, a pandemic, being stuck at home all the time, religion not becoming a major factor in your life, but becoming, maybe not as important. You still believe, but you don't have time to go to church, and you don't pay money towards a church.
Something like the pandemic actually increased religiosity.
Oh, that's weird.
Because it made it harder for people to go to church. So the people who did put in more of an effort to do the online services or whatnot, if they actually cared. The ones who stopped bothering didn't care in the first place.
Right.
It provided an exit point for the people who didn't want to keep going.
Mm-hmm. It sounds to me like if you say you're a member of a church, you pay a church organization money.
That's not the question, though.
I don't get it. Then what makes you a member of a church? What does that even mean? Actually,
the question doesn't matter for the question.
It's just
The question is, do you think you are a member of a church?
It's hard to extrapolate data when everybody's definition of what the question is asking is different. Interesting.
But the question's worded in a way to make it so that it's a question of personal identification, but a specific question of personal identification.
Okay. And as a person who's never identified as anything, it's very confusing.
So there was a point when you would have viewed yourself as a member of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, right? Or did you just go because your mom took you?
Well, yes. By the time I was old enough to be able to have a concept of being a member of a church, I think I was already well out.
Okay.
Of that. I guess, like I said, it seems, I don't know, it just feels like a money thing. I know it's
not a money thing.
I know, but that's what the word means to me. And so it's very confusing to me to understand why these people, why is there this big change if not for people's definition of the question?
And the reason for that is twofold.
Okay.
One, and the one specifically called out in this article, is that the silent generation and baby boomers are dying. They are the most religious generations alive, with the silent generation being a little bit more religious than baby boomers. Religiosity, there is a direct relationship between age and religiosity.
Right.
So the oldest people are the most religious, the most likely to be members of churches, and they are dying. Millennials and Gen Z are the least religious generations ever in the U.S. and are not joining or are leaving churches.
Okay.
So
yeah, that makes sense.
And it had been pretty static, through 1999, but that has all changed. And George W. Bush and his
September 11,
Bush's full embrace of evangelicals, the anti-gay constitutional amendments for states, the whole fight over gay rights, that has mostly served to drive out young people and keep them out of churches, whether they identify as Christian or not. They don't view themselves as the member of a church because the church they had been a member of either provides no value to them or
represents something that they just don't believe in.
Yeah.
They can't agree with.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I'm a Christian. I believe, this personal relationship with God, Jesus Christ is my savior. But my pastor keeps going off on trans people, and that does not make me comfortable, so I'm out.
Yeah. So you get a lot of that. I definitely think the pandemic probably made it easier for people to take a break from the attendance and break that.
Get their Sundays back
and decide they don't want to be a part of that after the pandemic. That they're not going back.
It'll be interesting to see what happens over the next year.
But the other big thing that happened with the pandemic was churches getting taken over by QAnon, churches defying pandemic mitigation efforts.
Yeah, I bet a lot of people had to leave their church because their church started getting all freaky about the masks.
That has driven out a lot of people. I know my parents haven't been to church in about 13 months. Yeah, about 13 months. They watch the online services, and even though their church has reopened for in-person gatherings, everybody who has been attending services in person has gotten COVID.
Oh, gosh. And they're Adventists. They're the healthy ones.
Yeah.
Of all the churches that you'd expect the members to actually wear a mask, that would be one of them.
But I know this particular congregation.
Oh, yeah. There are always.
Yeah, this is not the one that the doctors in town are the members of.
Okay. This is the rural folk?
This is the people who didn't feel like they fit in at the other churches where they all ended up. Yeah. So it's a really encouraging trend to see. This is similar to what was seen in Europe through the last half of the 20th century as the older generations continued to be parts of their churches. Sweden, for example, the older generations stayed active members of the Lutheran Church and younger generations just didn't. The U.S., that didn't happen, but it's happening now.
Okay.
And so we will likely see, if this trend continues, we will probably see in the next 20 or 30 years that number of people who identify as the member of a church will probably drop down to around 20%.
I still want to see how that correlates with people who identify as being religious or being a part of a religion, because member of a church and part of a religion are two different things. Or are they? And is that why I'm confused?
Okay, you're confusing church membership and religious identity. So there's the, like, you can, for a good example, you could, my stepbrother always had Adventist on his dog tags. He was not a member of the Adventist church. He didn't view himself as an Adventist, but if there was a choice on what chaplain would come see him on the gravesite or as he was dying, he would have wanted a Adventist chaplain. He still identified as an Adventist, but not as a member of the Adventist church.
Okay.
It made no difference in his life, but he still had that historical identification with it.
Okay.
Now, you have that. You also have the people who identify as just Christian. That's people that are generally referred to as nominally Christian, many of whom would never step foot in a church, have no interest in stepping foot in a church. It's the personal relationship with Jesus, and that's it. Or if you ask them, they'll say they're Christian and then not think about it at all until somebody else asks them about religion.
Until it shows up on another survey?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And so there's a fair number of people that fit into that category too. And so when you look at all of that, it's around 2/3 of the U.S. identify as Christian.
Okay.
Around 10% identify as atheist or agnostic or effectively the same. There's like...
And then the smattering of others.
Then there's a smattering of the spiritual but not religious, and then other religions as well.
Okay.
But so within the subset of people who identify as Christian, the subset within that of people who identify as members of churches is shrinking rapidly.
Well, maybe that's just because that's just an old concept.
Oh, no, that is not an old concept.
Oh, it just sounds like the wording was like, welcome to the 1930s.
No.
Kind of thing. And then, maybe nowadays people just don't identify with that wording. It sounds odd.
It sounds odd because you aren't a member of things.
Okay.
If you were a churchgoer, you would be a member of a church, and you would know the church that you are a member of. Now, then there's also the statistics about how many people actually attend church. And as of around 2006, when it came up in a class I was at the seminary, it was down to about 23% of people in the U.S. would be in attendance at a religious service of any kind on a given weekend.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
All right.
And what's funny with that is a lot of what you end up getting on people who identify as churches, or excuse me, people who identify as a member of a church but don't attend, are men whose wives are members and who attend.
Oh.
Because there are about twice as many women who attend churches as men who actually attend services.
Okay.
Membership numbers are closer than attendance numbers because usually the couple will both be members of the same church, but the husband stays home on Sunday while the wife and kids go to church.
Okay.
Virginia has now become the 12th state to ban the use of the gay and trans panic defense.
This one really blew me away because I was not aware of what gay trans panic defense was. So when I learned about it, I kept trying to talk to Dustin about it. It was inopportune times.
And it didn't click what she was talking about. I'm like,
what the hell is this? This doesn't make sense as a defense against like murder. But there you have it. People have been getting away with it for a long time.
Most notably, the Matthew Shepard's killer in 1998 used the defense in court. And in 2004, one of the four men convicted of killing Gwen Idaho, a trans teenager, also used the defense. And it gets used way more often than that. Those are just the most well-known cases. This bill was proposed by Democratic delegate Danica Roem, who is the first ever openly trans member of a state legislature.
Wow. There
is a similar bill in Vermont, also sponsored by a trans member of the state legislature. So there are more and more trans people getting into elected office, which is awesome.
You almost have to.
Yeah.
If you want to get your rights, you got to go to bat for it. And that's.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, so explain real quick what gay trans panic is.
So the premise is basically for the gay panic would be you're a straight man who's afraid that gay man is going to try to have sex with you. So you freak out, you feel scared, and in a fit of rage, kill him. The trans panic is more commonly you're hitting on a woman, find out she's trans, freak out that means you're gay, and in a fit of rage, kill her.
Yeah. So the thing that really threw me here was if you use this defense in a racially motivated hate crime, people would laugh in your face.
Yep.
And send you to prison because somebody comes around a corner and you're like, that person's black or something. And in a fit of rage or fear, I guess, kill the person. You still freaking murdered somebody.
Yeah. The idea is basically, the premise is basically that in a crime of passion, you have something that puts you out of your right mind that causes you to do something you wouldn't otherwise do.
Right. It's called hate.
Yes. Now, in the U.S., it would have been a popular defense to basically do a black panic defense to get out of killing a black person.
Right.
Generally a black
that was
man.
Used a
that
lot.
happened more commonly, though, the police just wouldn't arrest you and the prosecutor wouldn't press charges.
Right.
So it would never come up as a defense needed. That all started to change with the civil rights movement, and by the 60s and 70s, you'd be laughed out of court saying you were afraid that the black man was walking towards you, except we found with the Black Lives Matter movement and the police killings, they've been protesting that these police officers are killing black men basically for that reason.
Yeah.
So it is still
They just
happening.
don't call it that.
No.
No. If you're looking for an excuse for temporary insanity, there's a special place for people like that. And this should be a federal ban on that kind of defense. Insanity manifested by fear when there's no actual reason to be afraid.
Right. Well, like, generally speaking,
being gay doesn't mean you're going to kill somebody. Being trans doesn't mean you're going to rape somebody. Being black doesn't mean that you're going to, gangbang. The racially and the bigoted reasons that people come up with as an excuse to kill other people is it's infinite. And the U.S. should definitely try and cut down on that crap.
Right.
Rant.
No, that's a very good rant. It is not reasonable to be put into a murderous rage by hitting on someone or by getting surprised when you are hitting on someone or because you got hit on. That's insane. That is absolutely insane. There is nothing wrong with saying, "Oh, I'm sorry," and walking away. Hopefully you could be a little bit nicer than that, but still, there's nothing wrong with walking away. There's never, ever, it's insane.
Well, and that's the thing is, what's the definition of insanity for courts? If it's a temporary insanity, is it you had a history of mental unwellness? There's all sorts of stuff that go into it, but these fit of rages, a road rage.
Right.
These ragey, killing moments that just seem to come out of the blue just shows that there is something inherently wrong with that society.
Now one thing I think is worth looking at is if you're trying to go for first degree murder, that usually requires premeditation and depravity of mind, that you planned out and intended to kill this person. When it's motivated by hate for a class of people, that is a very different situation. Maybe we need to call it something different.
Yeah.
But it needs to be punished as hard, if not harder. Well, life in prison is a perfectly reasonable punishment. I would be perfectly fine with calling it something different if you went into a fit of rage because of your hate. And if you have that kind of hate that can cause you to kill a member of a class of people, you do not belong in our society.
I was going to say protected class, but that doesn't even, no, that's not even what matters here. It's just people segment the population into parts. And if you attack a certain part, then there's something wrong with you. And you don't deserve to be in that society.
Yeah. So, good job, Danica. We, hopefully more states will follow along. For our final news story, Saudi authorities have announced who they are going to allow to do the Umrah pilgrimage, starting from the start of Ramadan.
Okay, so when does that happen?
Ramadan is coming up, I think, next month.
Can't remember if it was May or June. Anyway,
it is
a pilgrimage. Lots of people very sick.
Later this month. Ramadan starts later this month.
Okay.
So it'll go into May. So the Umrah is a year-long pilgrimage that people can do. The Hajj is a specific once-a-year pilgrimage on a certain day. Those have, through the pandemic, been restricted only to Saudis or people already in Saudi Arabia. They are now opening it up to people outside of the country, but only if they have been immunized.
That's really hard. That's a line that's hard to draw for a country that is the host of a sacred place that millions of people need to for their religion.
Yeah.
Need to get to, and then you just close your borders and say, no, not you.
Yep. And
then, okay, you, but only if you've gotten a shot. I mean, that's hard to do, but it had to be done. I remember that news breaking last year that they had to basically say, okay, no Hajj this year. And everybody was like, wait, what?
They allowed 10,000 people to take part.
Which is nothing compared to the amount of people who usually take part.
The 2.5 million in 2019?
Nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. They allowed 10,000 who had to be selected by lottery and quarantine in hotels and follow very, very exact rules or they'd be ejected from the Hajj. They have not announced the rules for the Hajj this year.
Well, they're going to have to still be as strict.
It will be as strict. Yeah.
Yeah. Immunizations are not. There are variants and it's not 100%. And that would be a debacle if they had an outbreak.
They are in the middle of a pretty bad outbreak.
Is.
They are also allowing, so they're counting as immunized anybody who's received 2 doses of the vaccine for the 2-dose vaccines or a single dose of the single-dose vaccines at least 14 days prior or who have fully recovered from a COVID infection.
Okay.
So that opens it up to a decent amount of people across the Muslim world. The vaccine requirement, though, and I don't know how they're going to be handling the recovered from infection because the poorer countries haven't really had the capacity to do testing.
They'd have to be doing antibody testing on everybody who walked in.
Yeah.
Ugh. And then, I guess close the doors when your last test runs out.
And the poorer countries also...
Of course, it's so classist anyway, but
yeah, and those poorer countries also haven't gotten access to the vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
So
here in the U.S., we're begging people to come get it, and people are not getting it by choice. And then there's these poor countries who are like, we're still waiting for our first one.
Yeah,
can we have some now?
Yeah. Now, one thing that is interesting, you brought up with the antibody test. I've now had 2 antibody tests from blood donations.
Oh, very nice.
And the first one I got was in October, and that one was negative. The one I got from my donation a couple weeks ago was it wasn't a positive result. It was, what was the word?
A not negative?
It was something like not negative.
Yeah, okay.
And it was, I read through the explanation they had for it, was the positive, you have antibodies both for the spike and the nucleotide acids. Whereas with the not negative one, you only have the antibodies for the spike protein.
Okay. So that's a really easy to tell
if
somebody actually got it from the disease or from the vaccine.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah. And we have feedback. This is regarding episode 396, the interview with Lucian Greaves. From Treza55 via YouTube, Treza wrote, I thought that was a very informative conversation. Mr. Greaves is so on the money. USA is always the land of the buck. My major concern was the ability of most Americans to understand his extensive vocabulary. Greetings from Glasgow, Scotland. P.S. I refer to myself as a devout heathen. XPPS. Look at the Masonic nature of the dollar bill. Yes, his vocabulary was good. There wasn't any point where I thought it needed further dumbed down. I know I'm not necessarily the best judge of that, though.
Should have had me edit it.
Oh, you need to be on the interview to get stuff.
I know.
Simpler words used.
Yeah, I know.
And oh yeah, the dollar bill has lots of Masonic elements on it. There's movies on that.
And a country only worships one of two things, God or money. We live in a society that currently worships money.
All countries worship money. All right. Well, that's it for this week. Lauren, thank you for joining me.
Woo.
And listeners, remember, not all those who wander are lost. Thank you for listening to another episode of Atheist Nomads. You can find show notes and contact information at atheistnomads.com. Follow us on Twitter at Atheist Nomads and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Atheist Nomads. Please subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, or your podcatcher of choice. And while you're there, feel free to leave us a review. Theme music is courtesy of Sturdy Fred. Until next time, this has been the Atheist Nomads.